Hi, and welcome to the fourth in the series of our webinar series on internet independent. Today, we will be talking about combating misinformation and fake news. This is for educators or parents who want to go in more depth with our children and having conversation about cyber safety. Our conversations start from 7 to 17 years of age, and it's based on the Internet Independent Library. The Learning Library is something we created to help educators go in more depth on topics that we really talk about in cyber safety. So we know when children are online that they have the critical thinking skills and they have the knowledge to navigate by themselves. As educators and parents, we can't be online with our children all the time, and we need to give them more space and time to think through what's happening as they spend a lot of time on their online world, on their devices, and they need to have the skill set that we're giving them offline, online as well. Internet independence has a lot of tools that you can dive into. We have scenarios, we have something called an exercise in a box, where there are presentations, evidence, lesson plans. Children can immerse themselves into a cyber issue or problem and come up with solutions that they can then take away. And if they face something in the real world, they would have some type of roadmap that they can lean back on. Now, we have developed our Internet Independent Library on our framework. This is a curriculum that we've worked hard on, working with thousands of children across the globe. We've identified these are the key areas that children need to have a core curriculum on to be able to go out there and navigate their online space. And today, I will be deep diving into one area, the digital media and literacy side of things. This is an incredibly complicated topic, especially in a world where children are seeing more AI images, more deep fakes. It's really hard to navigate. And also when people's online motivations are very, very critical to think through. Why have people created this content? What is their end goal? How am I becoming part of the end goal? And we'll start this whole workshop exactly where I start most of my workshops, is really first basing ourselves back into our children's world and what that world looks like. I always dive back into their cyber rooms and say, hang on, what's happening there? What are you seeing? And where are you getting your information from? Interestingly, children do not get their news from news channels. Maybe we don't either. A lot of us do turn to our scrolls and our Facebook and our Instagram to stay up to date, or our Twitter. So children are no different. They're getting their information from YouTube, TikTok, influencers, and 40% of children get all their news from influencers. So we need to, first of all, map down where children hear about what's happening. You can go into any playground and children are on top of current affairs. They know what's happening in popular culture. It's not like they're not exposed to world events, probably more so than any time else. Where did they get that information from? Was it around the breakfast table? Was it an influencer they saw online? What was their take on it? Was their take very nuanced? Was their take very much the headline? And really start to discover, where are children getting our news? Where are they getting their literacy from? And how are they exposed to it and consuming it? And how do they forward it on? Are they also becoming part of a misinformation problem, which I'll talk to you about as we go through the workshop today. So the first key points are, what are the few definitions that we should be giving to children and talking to children about? First of all, we can start with manipulated content. We've gone from a world in the internet realm where we have had a lot of long form content. Children have been sitting in front of YouTube videos. I used to have a lot of conversations about how our children could sit in front of YouTube for hours and hours. They still can, but they are now very used to reels and short form content. The problem with short form content is, though it's easily digestible and very interesting to watch, it can be incredibly manipulated. It can be taken out of context. It can be used to influence people, children and adults, into thinking the way that the person who's put it online has dictated. So there is a lot of manipulated content in terms of content coming out of context. It's also manipulated really by editing, by AI, by putting into scenarios or into a conversation where it probably doesn't belong. And that falls into false context. Often images, videos, audio clips are misrepresented because they were intended for some other content. So false context is something with the older children we really need to delve into as well. Why has this piece of news been brought into this context when this news started off here? So can we start really breaking down pieces of news? It's often a really nice exercise to get children to bring in newspapers with different political motivations and read the same type of news from a different angle and see how it may have been manipulated, re-reported, put into different context. And especially with political campaigns, etc., how have stats been taken from its raw form and then been presented to you in a different form? And what was the motivation behind that? And so those are some conversations that can be happening on a more popular culture, on a more clickbait way. Clickbait has become a massive problem as well. Take the big articles, 10 ways to be famous, how to lose weight in 15 days. Singapore mum became a millionaire in 10 days. How did she do it? Clickbait by its nature is incredibly enticing. We've all fallen for it. And children have become a real target for it. They have to understand some digital literacy, some of the things they read online are done for the motivation of revenue and wealth of others. And as I've said in all my talks, one of the big things that we need to really get our children to really critically think is this for me? Am I experiencing this context or this for me and for me to be joyful and happy on the internet? Or has somebody given this to me because they have a separate motivation out there? Where do we start our conversations about fake news and digital literacy? One of the things is to really understand what the key terminology is out there. So some of the key terminology we have is fake news, propaganda, and disinformation. The fake news element is a well-rounded term that is used to navigate lots of different types of fake news out there. Propaganda is something when somebody has an agenda and wants to push through their agenda. There are many examples that we can show children about this. Another really aggressive form of fake news is disinformation. This is when an individual has gone out of their way to create a piece of news to hurt a community, an individual, or just to cause havoc and harm. With this peer group, it's often done because it's a prank or they found something really funny. It started with a rumor and the escalation happened. Disinformation could be created for that reason as well. People who create disinformation have a motivation for doing so. But another form of fake news that children really need to understand is misinformation. Misinformation is different, and we've all been privy to misinformation. It's when the news has come to us and we think about it and think, well, this sounds true. It's being sent on WhatsApp to me by somebody who I trust, who I listen to, who thinks like me, acts like me, consumes like me. Therefore, I'm going to forward it on. Or it's just become very viral in the playground and everybody's having a conversation, groupthink hits in and, well, they think this, therefore I think this too. Misinformation is handed on and this becomes incredibly viral. There are instances where we've had social media actually totally switched off because this misinformation has gone out of control, it's been tweeted way too much, and there could be an offline aggressive situation that could come out of that. And there's lots of situations, depending on the age of the children, that you can navigate and show actually how extreme it can be if children do face misinformation out there. So what we need them to really understand is to check their source, to check where their information came from. Now, this is not as easy as telling children, go online and find a news channel, because most of the children's authentic sources tend to be influencers, YouTube or Google. And as we know, all three of those also have their own motivation. Take them over to the front page of Google and show them the sponsored posts at the top. Why would people sponsor themselves to get at the top? Why would they do that? Does that mean that they're the best answer? or the answer that will create the most amount of revenue for Google. Children need to understand the source that the educator, yourself, really respects and understands, and their parents also. It has become very decisive what news is true and not true. And so older children also need to be able to reflect on what they're reading. Again, I go back to that activity where you bring in a newspaper, maybe show how a left-wing or right-wing newspaper would report the same story. What language do they use? Where are they putting the emphasis? And where are they inflaming or disgruntling the information and saying, you don't really need to listen to that? Really questioning the motivation of what they're reading online. And then be aware of going back to their cyber bedrooms, going back to their digital identities and saying, who am I? What's my value system? Do I understand this? The other thing about the online space is there's a lot of people trying to support and combat facts and fake news with a lot of fact-checking tools. Every country has fact-checking tools that will work for them. I will go through some of them, but one of them is Snopes, which you can go onto snopes.org, where you can go and check and verify news. The other would be Google reverse image search, with so many images going out there that are now AI and not very well founded. You can go and look at Google reverse image search. The other thing to do is just to cross-check, have multiple sources. Don't just rely on one, even if it's an authentic source you trust. Every newspaper out there has had a moment where they've been hacked or have reported wrongly. So if it sounds like it's very odd, you need multiple or alternative searches. So get your children to do an activity and find out the best fact-checking tools in your country. A lot of governments have their own, so go and check that out. One of the most complicated things about this conversation is hard to think what a world our children are roaming into looks like when there's a lack of trust online. So there's also a great activity we can do with our children to create a trust pool where we can, as a classroom, as educators, work through the apps, the people, the influence online that they trust. So they know when something comes along where they can go and just check that out. And it could be something the school trusts, it could be the school Padlet board or something of that line where children can start to feel that there's a space for them to go and really be able to check out things when they're not too sure. That's a very interesting game or tool that you can play with the children. To wrap up some of the things that you can get your children to do to ensure that they can verify something when they see it is, first of all, go back to our cybersecurity training and look at the URL. Does it look authentic? Does it look fishy? Does it look scammy? Is there a lock in the corner? Is it HTTPS? Why has somebody come up with this link? Is there anything that's asking you to put in your personal information or offering you something too good to be true? Could it be phishing? Verify your source, as I just said. Make sure you have alternative channels to have a look at that and ensure that you're correct. Also, that back to that, who's saying it, why are they saying it, what's their motivation behind saying it? Incredibly important that we keep having this conversation. Google reverse image search, as I said, is a fantastic tool for our children, and Snopes.com, another one. Trust your instinct. This is very important for children. Whenever I go into a class and we talk about fake news, one of the things that I always talk about is what do they think is true and what is not, and they will go into the nuance of a photo. They will talk about the skin color, they understand the filter. They will teach us a lot about how they now navigate their digital spaces, knowing that there is ulterior motives behind a lot of what they see. So they will also tell us about their experiences and share with us. One of the last things that we need to consider is the rise of the AI. AI in the last couple of months has imploded. Whenever you listen to this video, I'm sure it will implode again. There is now gone from a Photoshop editing tool where you could say, oh, I can see that's edited, to actual imagery where you really cannot tell. And then a lot of people, influencers, people they may respect, have had words put into their mouths. They may have never ever said it. Again, we need to start exposing our children to AI generated content so we can start explaining the differences between an authentic image and an unauthentic image. Moving on just from the image, what we're also seeing children have been infiltrated by is audio. There are many apps out there that can warp audio to make it sound like Trump said it, to make it sound like Obama says it. There are apps that can be utilized and often are in the classroom where they can create avatars and put anybody's celebrity voice on the top of it. Have that talk about what that could do and where that can go and how that can escalate. This is an incredibly new topic. Us as educators cannot pretend we know everything. So we need to open the channel of communication so our children can also tell us what they've learned about this space as well, because there's so much we can learn together as we navigate this new era. The biggest thing that's going to help all of us, adults, children, all of us alike, is critical thinking. This skill can not be overemphasized in the space of cyber safety and being in the digital world. Get them to think through these three things, which I've navigated all the way through: context, bias, and logic. Work through these, build on activities. Internet Independent has lots of activities that will really push this line of thought. When you have these critical thinking experiences and activities in the classroom, always go back to their cyber world and back into context. Often we pick up materials online that were made for adults and for the corporate setting. If it doesn't resonate and they can't understand what that looks like, because that's not their digital experience, often it just becomes a learning activity they can regurgitate. But when they come across the problem, the issue, the experience, which they all do, they don't know how to bring it back to their real worlds. So make sure that we immerse and understand what they're doing online, and then navigate backwards with the teaching tool or the learning tool. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and feel free to reach out to us at any time and we can support you with your cyber requirements moving forward. Thank you very much.